What's up, guys? On this episode of Blood, Sweat, and Gear, Skip, Andrew, and myself are going to knock out an entire insulin special. So get out your notepad and sit down, relax, and we hope you learn something.
Let's just paint a scenario. You're in a cardio. You're in a prep. You're doing cardio. Give us the time frame. Like you wake up, you test your blood sugar, and let's say it's like right at 90, right? Or let's say it's 93 or something like that, and you want to get it to say like 80s before you start your cardio. What is for you? Like what do you dose? What type of insulin? And then how long before you start your cardio, would you dose it?
If I'm at right around 90, or even high 80s, I might dose 3 units. Not much. I mean, maybe 4. Look, again, this is just my opinion to the listeners, so I want to be careful with this because it's insulin. But the average person can take 3, maybe 4 units of insulin and not eat anything at all. Yeah. And take a blood sugar level of, high 80s or 90s down into the 70s and be fine. It's not like you're going to go hypo unless you hit those 3 or 4 units and you're at a 66 or, a 68 or something like that, maybe a 70. It's just not typically going to happen. So I'll wait until I, and there's not really any time frame. I might give it an hour before I eat. I probably would retest again just to make sure. I'm an over tester when it comes to things like that. So even in between load meals, I think it's huge to test blood sugar levels when you're loading high carb meals, skip loading, cheat meals, whatever, especially if they're back-to-back cheat meals, because if you're ready to eat again and you have a fasted blood glucose of, 120, 125, it ain't time to eat yet. No. You can still ride. Your body is still digesting that food. You're still moving nutrients and shuttling them, assimilating, absorbing. Just wait it out. Otherwise, what you're going to find, because blood sugar levels are related directly to, your digestion, the efficiency of your digestion, you're not going to be able to eat much anyway. You're going to be full. Even if you think, I'm getting hungry. I think we've all done that. It's like, I bet my blood sugar is a little low. And then I test it and it's like 106. I'm like, not there yet. So wait it out. There are times where in between load meals, I might be, 100, 105, something like that. And I might be pressed for time. So I'll increase my insulin dose over what I would normally take for the next meal and get that meal in, because I'd rather get it in than, say, lose sleep by staying up for another hour or something. It's still not, in my opinion, optimal. It's more making the best of the situation, I think, and kind of not wanting to trade an hour of sleep for an elevated blood glucose. Now, if I was at 150 or something like that, that'd be a little bit different. And let me throw in something else that I think is important that I've run into, oddly, since I've been loading with cleaner meals like the poke bowl meals versus the heavier meals like pancakes and things like that. Sometimes if the meal goes long and I've overshot the meal and my blood sugar levels are elevated and I have to wait longer, I'll hit another dose of insulin an hour or 2 before the next meal. So let's say I have to go 4 hours in between meals because for whatever reason I took in too many carbs and my blood sugar level's too high, or I just plain overate. With that 4-hour gap, about 2 hours in, if I'm real high, I'll hit another dose of insulin, because what'll essentially happen is the insulin dose will run out. I mean, it kind of doesn't, there's just a time where it's going to peak and it's going to come down. And if it doesn't cover the carbs, then your blood sugar level is going to stay elevated, because then your natural insulin has to take in, and it's nowhere near as I don't think it's anywhere near as efficient as exogenous insulin. So if you want to get it controlled and get that meal in quicker, you need to hit another dose of insulin. Now, again, then you have potential overlap. You got to kind of know what you're doing and have a bit of experience of knowing how you're going to respond, because it can get a little tricky.
So yeah, you're kind of like, I think this is more at an advanced level that you're talking about. So if we're talking about somebody who's maybe tuning in and they're saying, hey, okay, I'm ready to start this. My bodybuilding's in a place where I'm ready to use it. Where do we start?
I think let's use Skip's example of a skip load or a refeed day. I think that's a good place to start, so you can track how your body utilizes insulin. And all right, so let's say let's just, because I think people need examples and they need some rough baseline numbers. Sure. So let's just say your base diet has you eating something like 300 grams of carbohydrates daily, and that's keeping you in a deficit. Your proteins, 350, whatever. Your fats are around 50, but let's just focus on the carbohydrates, right? So 300 grams of carbs a day, and you're going to do your first refeed using insulin, and you're going to double the carbs to like 600. All right. And if you're doing 6 meals a day, let's just make it real simple. You're going to do 100 grams of carbs per meal. All right. So let's say you're going to eat your 100 grams of carbs and you take something like 5 units of insulin with that meal. And then 2.5 hours later, and like Skip says, it's better to overcheck than to undercheck and just assume. So let's say you check your glucose at 1 hour, 2 hours, and 2.5 hours. All right. And you see after 1 hour, your blood sugar is somewhere in the 220s. And then at the second hour, your blood sugar is right at 120. And then at 2.5 hours, your blood sugar is at, let's say, 95. Okay. Still higher than what we want it to be before you take your next meal, because I really do think people should pay attention to that 90 milligrams per deciliter as an indicator as to whether their body is ready to accept and use the next meal. All right.
I like that.
So what would I do in that situation? I would take 2 to 3 units of insulin at 2.5 hours post meal. Right. Okay. And then I would wait 30 minutes and I would check again. And for most people, that's going to put you at like 82 or, maybe a little bit lower, even somewhere in that, 78 to 85 range. Well, you're ready for your next meal. So now you have a pretty good idea, right? Let's just say you're not training that day, so you're not going to have any, extra exertion that's going to burn up glucose. It's a rest day. You're doing a refeed. So you go to that next meal and you try to replicate that same thing. You say, okay, I'm going to take 100 grams of carbs for this next meal. This time I'm going to use 7 units of insulin as soon as I'm done the meal. And you do the same testing procedure, right? And maybe the numbers are a little bit lower this time, so that by the time you get to that 2.5 hour mark where you're starting to think, okay, am I going to eat my third meal? You are right at like 87. Okay, great. So now you have some pretty good information going forward where you can titrate 1 unit up or 1 unit down with your insulin so that you don't need to take more exogenous insulin before the next meal. Okay. And I'm totally saying definitely reserve the right to do that, because for me, it makes no sense to continue to compound meals on top of meals if your blood sugar isn't cleared below 90 milligrams per deciliter. And this is something I do with peaking people. If we know that you need a lot of carbohydrates to fill out, we're definitely going to check. We're going to be feeding you the carbohydrates. We're going to check your blood sugar at like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And if we need to use a little extra insulin to clear the bloodstream before that next meal, I have no problems doing that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Okay.
Some sort of fast insulin, obviously, but I just wanted to say it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it used to be a lot easier to talk about insulin because in bodybuilding, you either had like Lantus or you had Humalog or Humalin. So you basically had 3 different types. You had your rapid, you had your semi-rapid but fast, and then you had your long. But now there's so many different brands, right? Between Lantus and Tresiba for your longers, between Fiasp and Humalog and Apidra, and there's another new one on the market now for your rapids.
And then you have these something.
Yeah. And then you have like your Humalog.
And you have your foreign ones that are the same thing, but they're different names. So
and then you have your Walmart brands, right, which have the slightly different names. So it's important when you're talking with clients or if you're an athlete that's trying to use this stuff that you understand which insulin you do have. So and Scott, can you put up that chart that I just sent you via text message? It's important to understand, figure out what the generic name is, right? Like your insulin Lispro, Aspart, I don't even know how to say the glycine. Those are your rapids, right? Those are your they're your Humalogs, they're your Apidra, your Fiasp. Those are like the ones that are typically used in bodybuilding, right? And then you have all the way on the other end your insulin glargine, which would be your Lantus types, okay? And then you have some other stuff in between. But really, I see people either using the insulin Lispro, Aspart, or the glargine type insulins. Maybe the Detamir. I can't remember the trade name for that one. But those are like the insulins that you're going to be using or that you're going to come into contact with at least from a bodybuilding aspect. So it's important to know which one you have. So you don't have something like Lantus and you think, okay, I'm going to take it and it's going to give me the same response as a Humalog or an Apidra.
With my pre-web. Thank you for tuning in. And if we are providing value to you today, let me encourage you to subscribe and hit the bell. We have several bodybuilding podcasts that come out each week. After, your timing is going to be part of that. And then same too, I think, by the way, too, with regular insulin, we did talk about that a couple episodes ago about how we couldn't find it on Walmart. I had people message me and they showed me that it is still available at Walmart over the counter.
Yeah, but check in with me and say the same thing. Yeah.
It's the Relion brand, right?
Novolin R.
I think Novolin R. I think that there is the Relion brand, but they had what we found was the 70-30, and they had the Novolin R was available still. Just to throw it out there, because we did say we can't find it, and then people are like, here you go, here's a link.
Okay.
And let me add, in case anybody is wondering, why would you combine the Lantus with the Humalog or with the IM dosed Humulin? And the reason is, my reason is for doing it myself is it does two main things. It makes me require less. I'm going to call it Humalog. I'm sorry, but so it's not.
That sounds good.
I feel like I'm confusing people, so that I can use less Humalog per meal. And it also takes away from this constant, maybe not constant, but this dip. It minimizes the dip so that there's more. The Lantus is kind of holding a baseline because it holds for about 12 to 14 hours roughly. It goes longer than that, but it falls off more sharply after the 12 to 14 hours. That's why some people can dose it 24 every 24 hours, and then other people need to dose it, every roughly 12 hours. It just depends on how you respond during the day versus fasted blood sugar levels in the morning. So that's the main reason I like using that combination. It's just not as much of a sway in either direction. There was one other thing too, because I had two. You guys, I'll defer to you guys for a minute because it'll come to me as soon as we're talking.
We'll put that chart back up one more time,
sure.
Because it goes into what we're talking about. Between using, say, like a Lantus as more of a basal insulin when you're doing a high carb day. So look at the left column, glucose infusion rate, right, versus the time. All right, and you'll notice, the rapids, they hit you really hard and fast, and they fall off really hard and fast. And then your Lantus or your Glargine, that hits you a much, much slower. It's much less pronounced, but it's always in the background for a much longer period of time. So most people, when they take it, like a Lantus, whether they're taking it first thing in the morning or they're taking it before bed, which is also appropriate, because if you'll notice, it doesn't kick in for almost 6-7 hours. And then it just kind of has a steady baseline until about hour 15. And then it starts to fall off until it's pretty much done about 24 hours. Right. And I think, with the basal insulins, what you'll find is, and this is what I've been experimenting with people that we're using this with in the off season in particular, instead of doing one dosing first thing in the morning, whether it's, they wake up and they take it at 6 a.m. or they take it right before they go to bed or with their last meal, we're doing more of a 12-hour thing. So if they're taking it at 7 a.m., we're going to dose it again, but half the dose. We're going to dose it again at 7 p.m. So we're keeping more of a steady base, steady background basal insulin going. That's almost mimicking what the pancreas is doing in a sense, in terms of this kind of basal insulin that we're releasing. And I'm seeing some positive stuff with keeping people's blood sugar more optimized. And by optimized, I mean sub 90 when it's time to eat again.
Yeah. What I've done with Lantus is start it just with one shot, 24 hours, just to see how we respond. And then from there, then we could go from one shot and then 12 hours later.
Yep. And you're talking.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and you're talking let's say you're going to use 20 units of a Lantus type product. Yeah. And now are you cutting it to 10 units?
Yeah, I would start with, that's what I generally start with would be, actually, I just start with 10 in the morning, period. and then just evaluate, just see what's going to happen, because I don't know how, each individual is going to respond. And then from there, then we could go with 10 and 10, and build from there as needed.
Gotcha.
I'd rather start, you know what I mean? I always want to start lower with insulin. I think that we always have an opportunity to take more. And, but we can't necessarily take less. I've definitely made my share of mistakes with it over the years. Not as much with a long-acting insulin, but I think no matter how hard we try, at least with short-acting insulin especially, there's always going to be sometimes it the math doesn't add up. What ends up happening isn't exactly what we expected, or how it looked on paper,
I also want to point out, though, that because we used to have this fear of insulin, and one shot could kill you. And sure, one shot with 300 units of a Humalog could possibly kill you.
Even then.
But even then,
people have tried it and it doesn't work.
Exactly. People have tried to commit using, a full pen of.
We can't say that word.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't say it?
No, you can't say that word on YouTube. They don't like that. Even if you're talking about it in like a They don't
what if you're talking about it in an awareness way, like a.
Then we'd probably have to like certify that this is some sort of
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to go into it, but
I know. Yeah, it's hard to get around that because it's important.
My point being, though, is that because I used to be like, oh, I got to be so careful with my insulin, right?
Yeah.
It's not as dangerous as you think. And I don't want people to think this is a certified to like, okay, go and experiment and do some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm saying no one is going to off themselves with 5 units of insulin, even if they're not going to eat.
Right.
Okay. Your body produces glucagon. You'll be fine. Now, and we've all had this text message from clients where you had them using 5 units of insulin with a pre-workout meal or an intra-workout meal, and they didn't understand the math, and they took 50 units.
Right.
Have you guys had that, right?
Yeah.
Yep. That's a situation I think that we should address where, okay, client tells you that they're starting to get sweaty. They're like, I think I took too much. And you say, okay, show me on the syringe how much you took. You're like, okay, you took 50 units, not 5. You took 10 times more than what we wanted. At that point, you're not going to work out. You're going to go and eat. Okay. And I'd say, okay, go home or stop at the gas station. Let's get some type of quick source now, like a sugar, a juice or a soda or something. And then let's also start eating like a rice meal, like a good blend of 50-50, and then just relax, test your blood sugar in 2 hours, and let me know where you're at. And usually they're fine. Yeah. Don't go to sleep, don't take a nap, but just be conscious, be checking yourself every hour or so and report back in 2 hours. And usually you'll find, okay, I'm back to like 90 and I'm fine. So I just do think we should put that caveat of make sure you understand how to measure.
Yeah, okay. No question.
Yeah.
And as a trainer, you're obligated and you're responsible for your clients. So if they don't know, I would argue that it's on you. I always point out that this is the difference between 1 unit, because what happens is the brain processing goes, oh, that's too small. And you see on the syringes say 0.1, 0.2, and that's 10. And 20, not 0.1.
Yeah.
So you have to talk about ticks, and I
take pictures. Yeah, me too.
This is what 10 units looks like. It is not 1. It is not, 20 is different than 2. Let me point out too that I think that, because I think this is important as well. It's no coincidence that the newbies don't usually have these severe problems with insulin. It's the veterans who do, and it's because of complacency. I have clients, and I won't mention any names because they're good guys, and I've been known in the past to do it too. You get this predictable pattern of how you're responding to insulin doses, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to run and do this, so I'm not going to bother to check. I know what it's going to be. Or I'm going to go get mail, or I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to sit down and take a shit. And, oh, gee, I'm a little lightheaded. Oh, it's the complacency and it's the not paying attention that can get you in trouble. The newbies are all over it because they take 5 units and they think they're just going to die. and there's something good to be said of that because it's an awareness. They're on top of it. They're paying attention. Just don't become complacent. I do want to go back to those two things I was talking about real quick because I don't want to forget them. The one is when I say I use 40 units of Lantus as a baseline, I want to be clear that I do like to go up from there because that decreases the amount that I have to take prior to each meal as well. And with those longer and this is when I'm loading for a long period of time. It's not 2 or 3 meals. It's, most of the day, if not the entire day. So it just makes the entire process more predictable and has less peaks and valleys. Another thing to note is this. If you're loading or you're doing a lot of high carb meals, typically throughout the day, if you were to keep the same insulin dose for each meal, your blood sugar levels are going to start to creep up as the day goes on. It's just something that I've seen over time, not only with myself, but with more. Now, if you just had an unlimited time and you're like, okay, I'm just going to wait until I get to this particular, but if you're trying to get X amount of carbs in, sometimes you have to kind of push them a little bit closer together, and you got to deal with a little bit higher blood sugar level before you go into the next meal. So even though you're going to try to counter, it becomes a little bit more of a gray area, like Andrew was talking about. And I do the same thing, Andrew. So it's certainly not bad or right or wrong. It's just that when you start to say, okay, well, I'm going to take this amount of this dose of insulin because I'm at this BG level. If you're new, let me finish that thought, because that was all over the place. If you're going to take a second dose of insulin prior, like say a half hour, an hour prior to your next meal, to bring down blood glucose levels quicker so that you can get to that next meal quicker, it's a little bit of a guessing game as far as the time that it's going to take to do that. So especially when someone isn't experienced. So you have to pay attention to the patterns over time. It's always good to log. This is what I log, and I've been doing this a long time. I log the time of the meal. I log how many grams of carbs. I log my blood sugar level, and I log the dose of the insulin at that point. And I track that every meal, and I go back, because if you do something and it works perfectly and your blood sugar levels are great with this amount of meal, this amount of high carb meals the week prior, and this insulin dosing, it's not going to work exactly. You're not going to get the same numbers a week later. There's going to be a little bit of variance. So you need to pay attention to those numbers, pay attention to the minutia, and look for patterns. I'm a patterns guy. My clients hear me say this all the time. There's patterns in everything. It's just sometimes it takes a while to find those patterns, but they're important.
Guys, let's talk about intra-workout carbs and saving money. So like the past 10, 15 years, intra-workouts become super popular. It's a great way to support pre-workout insulin use. It's great for recovery, and it's great for endurance in those long workouts. Here's the thing. It's really expensive. It's not only expensive for us, it's expensive for supplement companies. They really don't make a lot of money off of it. That's where True Nutrition comes in. So True Nutrition, they're not only a retailer, they're also a manufacturer. They're actually making a lot of the products that you guys are already buying from other companies. So just think about it. You're going to cut out the middleman. The only thing you're going to miss out on is the fancy labels and the branding. Outside of that, you're getting the exact same high quality products, but you're getting it directly from the source. If you're going to pay for the price of highly branched cyclic dextrin, ensure that you're getting 25 grams per scoop, not of a mix of carbs, but just of highly branched cyclic dextrin. We can mix the other stuff in later, Use our code THINK, get some savings, plus it's like voting for us. It lets them know that you support what we're doing.
Scott, did you have something about how to measure your insulin correctly?
Yeah. So Andrew sent me an actual picture of an insulin pen, and I was like, I don't know if we want to put that on the screen. So I went over to the peptide calculator, and I grabbed this. So there's, there's 100 units, right? And
that's a good way to do it.
And then I've got it measured at 10 units there. So
because what I'd sent Scott for people listening was a picture. Because what I do is I just go to the internet and I pull up a picture of a syringe, and then I literally indicate if they're a first timer and don't know how to measure properly with an arrow, like this is what 5 units is, this is what 10 units is, this is what 20, so they were very clear on, and you should be able to see it too, like if you have a 100-unit syringe and you tell them, like, look, if you were to pull that whole syringe out and you have a regular pen, you would only be able to fill that thing 3 times. Okay. That's not what we're trying to do here. Right. Like we're not trying to, this bottle should last you for a while, or this pen should last you for a while if we're only using 5 units. So keep that in mind when you're measuring out. Like if it seems like you're taking too much or you're measuring out too much, don't take it. Send me a picture of what you're doing and ask, and we'll make sure you're correct. No one workout or one, insulin situation is worth having a moment.
Yeah. It's literally just drops. And once they figure that out, they're like, oh my God, this bottle's going to last me a long time. It's going to last me forever,
Yeah.
You'll probably get a new one before.
And don't go by how you feel.
Yeah.
Because even with my experience, even with our experience, just the other day, I was like, I need to test in between meals. And I tested, I was like, 48. Like, wow, I feel really good. Like I could just run around and jump, but I'm not going to because things could go downhill very quickly. So then the next question might be, you probably adjusted your insulin dose down for the next meal. No, I kept it the same. I just made sure that when I took my shot, there was no gap of me checking my phone or having a conversation with my wife or, dropping a deuce. I got right on my meal and everything was fine. So understand that when you hit that insulin dose, you know what? I'm going to add one other thing that seems very, very rudimentary to us, but I think it's very, very important. It's a very easy mistake to make. Let's say you're out to dinner or you're out to a meal and you're going to hit your insulin dose. If you order it and the waitress says it's coming and you take your insulin dose, you're a moron. That food needs to be sitting in front of you because you don't know what's going to happen. So
I've done that.
Not a good, even if it's sitting in front of you and you're going to wait, that's fine. But the food needs to be there in front of you. At the same time, don't think that as soon as you take that dose, you better start shoveling it in. You start choking on your food. That's not exactly how it works either. There are some people, and I won't mention any names, who will take their insulin dose and then literally wait for their blood sugar levels to start falling more before they start eating. Sometimes that can be 15 minutes. Sometimes it can be 30 minutes. So I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I actually think it's a good idea. I just think that if you don't have the experience,
I'm going to throw myself under the bus. That's me.
Okay.
That's
is it? Okay.
Okay. So all of us on this podcast, we know, because we've used plenty of insulin. We know what normal blood sugar feels like. We know what being 70 feels like. We know what 40 feels like because I
didn't know what 48 felt like because I'll be honest.
What's that?
And I shouldn't.
I think I'm getting down there right now.
So I am too. So because all three of us are either dieting or have very pronounced insulin blood sugar responses and we're also in tune with that because right now I can tell you I'm probably like at 68 just with how I'm feeling right now. I felt a noticeable drop. My lower back's starting to sweat a little bit and I ate only about an hour and a half ago. Right?
What did you eat?
But I had 200 grams of turkey, 15 grams of avocado oil, and 60 grams of Elevate Foods cream of rice. Use code Barry. The stuff is delicious.
Okay, so you had carbs and fats still, and you still
but I'm pretty lean right now. So it's every 2 hours, my body if I'm not doing like a refeed or anything, or actually when I am doing a refeed, it actually becomes more pronounced. But that's a whole nother topic we could talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
But I wanted to ask you, Scott, how do you, because people like usable information, and I'll ask you in a minute for another situation, but how do you dose peri-workout insulin? Like if you have a client that's like, okay, Scott, I want to do some intracarbs and some insulin. How do you like to dose it and timing and how do you do it?
Generally, I like to have my solid food meal, it depends on the individual, but about an hour before training is what I would prefer myself. Some people, they need more time than that to digest their food. Then depending on the insulin that we're using, it could be, if we're using Humalog R and we're just going to take it sub-Q, then 30 minutes before training. Or if I'm using a faster acting insulin, it'll be 15 minutes before training. And then from there, we start drinking the intra-workout shake, like literally the minute that you get into the gym. I'm going to keep I'm going to keep the insulin pretty low for that. Like I'll probably start with like 3 units is where I would go. Years ago, we used to try to match our carbs to our insulin. And guys, the dosing was a lot higher. Like I remember like getting bad insulin sensitivity issues too, taking 20 plus units. I don't know how high you guys have gone, but I take like 20 units of fast acting insulin and it wasn't even giving me the same pumps as 10 units was when I first started it. And I do that twice a day. So I was like 20 units twice a day of fast acting insulin. But now I'll keep that probably. So let's say somebody wanted to make progress in their lower body. We might start insulin with and let's say they're on like a high frequency plan where they end up training legs twice a week. We might use that only on leg days and then also say on a pull day, somewhere where they're starting out just to introduce the insulin like 3 times per week. And then that would be it. We drink the shake, then immediately post workout, I might have them do some type of just protein, but we already had enough carbs to keep that covered. And then we just go to a high carbohydrate meal for the post-workout meal. Usually they're good to be able to, we'll line it up where they're eating maybe an hour after their training. I think that the most important thing is just making sure that you nail that timing. That's like, I think that you have to pay more attention to when you're getting your carbohydrates in. Like you can't like leave the gym and then lollygag and decide to eat 2 hours. Like you need to eat when it's time to eat. So something along those lines.
Depletion will cut that time down quite a bit. There have been times where I've stopped
depletion?
just for gas and pick up Zyn. Whoa. Let me
So,
try that again. I almost dumped everything right there.
You didn't mean to do that, did you?
No. I have a very light desk.
And I'll add too, and I want to add too, if you're using like 3 units of insulin, like you said at the beginning of the episode, Skip, a dose like that, really, you're probably not going to have any issues. You know what I mean? Even like you said with depletion, but like 3 units, we're going to be like super, super safe. I'm not going to be really concerned, but I still want people to follow, you know, like a really strict protocol with it, just as kind of building those habits.
Sure, and start conservative, and then you can kind of push from there.
Yeah.
It's just that at that level of depletion definitely matters, because there are Fridays where all I'm training is arms.
Yeah.
And if I stop for Zins and gas, by the time I get home, I'm like, get the hell out of my way, everybody out the kitchen. I got to get my shit because I'm sweating and it's not good.
Well, let's touch on that too, though. So let's say you're using intra-workout or pre-workout insulin, intra-workout carbs, and then you're in a fat loss or a prep situation, and then you're also doing cardio, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, like by the time you get done your workout, because you're lean and with how you're feeling, you're like, okay, I'm definitely not, you know, I'm definitely not hyperglycemic right now. Like I'm maybe 90, or I'm back down to 80 at this point, and then you do your cardio. How do you feel about using that time to do the cardio for enhanced fat loss? Because you've used insulin to both drive glucose into the muscle and also clear your bloodstream of glucose. How do you guys feel about using that time for fat loss?
I don't like it because I have found that I go hypo very, very quickly. And let me add something in.
Because you go hypo. That's what I'm saying. Because you go hypo.
Yeah, it's do not. This is so important because I could not figure out what the problem was. But what I do is this is my schedule. I train at night about 6 hours, 7 hours after I'm awake. So I train at about 9 o'clock. I get done at about 11. I have my post-workout, then I have a meal, and then I do my cardio about an hour after that, prior to the next meal. And I was using Yohimbine. Mm-hmm. And if there is any insulin or you have blood glucose levels problems where you're relatively low, even on low normal area, and you use enough Yohimbine, you will smash into the wall. That's what it was actually. Remember I called it slap footing, the cardio on the treadmill. Where I'm like, I'm neurologically, like I don't have control over my legs, and I'm not running. I'm doing a fast walk on an incline of about 8. With a heart rate, target heart rate of I'm only around the 110 mark. And it was the Yohimbine battling with the insulin versus the low blood sugar level. Now I can use Yohimbine if I split my cardio or I do my cardio earlier in the day because it's not around the insulin coming off of post-workout. And understand this, I typically only use about 8, maybe 10 units. 10 units is high for me if I'm in a cut phase. Pre-workout for insulin, and I only take in 50 grams of intracarbs. Unless it's leg day, I take in 75. I think it's important to know that the old antiquated 10-to-1 ratio of carbs to insulin, it wasn't the insulin that was making everybody fat. It was the overdoing and overconsumption of the carbs. Now, it's safer, start that way, and then back off from there. But if you're trying to get, into shape and you're trying to get lean and you're trying to get shredded, you got to balance out the insulin with the carbs, because if you're playing it safe, not playing it safe, you always want to play it safe. But if you're going overboard on the carbs, there's just you're not going to get anywhere. And then you're going to blame us because we sat here and said, you can get shredded on insulin. And I don't pick days to do insulin. I take pre-workout insulin every workout and every load day for the last year and a half. And I arguably got leaner, faster, and held, well, it's not even arguable as far as what I've seen. I think that anybody out, and this is a bold statement, and I understand this because everybody has their methodology as trainers, and well-respected trainers may disagree with me and have a different protocol. That's okay. I think that it is a horrible idea to make a blanket statement that you're not going to get shredded or you're not going to get lean using insulin frequently.
Oh, yeah.
I think that is so misguided and almost, I'll tell you what, if you'd gone back 3 years ago, I'd have probably said something similar, that it needs to be minimal. You don't want to risk insulin sensitivity issues. When you're in a deficit and you're using it and it's fast acting like that and you're using it pre-workout, I don't see any insulin sensitivity issues unless you're just taking in too many carbs consistently. I don't see it happening because I haven't seen it happen with myself, other competitors who are clients, and even average people who are like, yeah, I want to get into this insulin. I want to see how I respond to it. Have not seen it.
I agree with you. Insulin doesn't make you fat. Improper use of insulin and carbohydrates makes you fat. But I want to go back to my scenario that I was pointing out. And I don't, this is not for everybody. This is for people that are very in tune and have safety mechanisms set up in place. Because
you're talking about the cardio, the post-training cardio part?
Yes, because I like to use insulin in the same way we're talking about using insulin fasted, right? To drive your blood sugar lower, to rely more on fat for fuel, to get leaner faster. I like to, and I like to be able to combine both to get the positive benefits of insulin in an anabolic sense for loading the your muscles with extra glucose and getting better pumps and all the good stuff that goes with it. But I also like how it drops your blood sugar a little bit faster, and then utilizing cardio to burn fat better. And you're right.
I don't agree. I don't disagree with that. For the record, I was making the statement based on my situation. I got to the point where I couldn't do it. But I agree with you.
Because I'm going back to what you're saying about how like the slap foot cardio and like you don't feel good while you do it. Okay. It is not a good state of mind to be in. It is not. The only thing that keeps one foot moving in front of the other is I'm getting leaner. I'm getting leaner. I'm getting leaner faster, because I've done this so many times in contest preps where I use that strategy. And again, I have safety mechanisms in place because, like I told you before, my blood sugar has been down to 28. Okay. When I did one of these, and it was the only time you could arguably say I quote cheated on a diet, when I texted John barely and told him that I was at 28. I think I'm going to drink a Coke, and he's like, go drink it now. Drink 2 of them, But my point being is always if you do use this, always have a fast sugar source ready and available in case you do go too hard, too fast, and you can't get out of that hole. Okay. Mm-hmm. But you can utilize it and you can walk that line where you're in, and you feel very uncomfortable. Okay. It isn't, your brain is telling you to stop and go and eat, but you're putting one foot in front of the other. I do think you burn fat a lot faster that way. And so it is one of my extreme fat loss, when we really need to push it and we really need to get results quickly. We've run out of other options, your traditional options. It is one of the extreme things that I do, with that safety caveat in place of, hey, if you test your blood sugar and you're below this number, I don't care what I have on your diet. I want you to eat 50 grams of fast acting carbs immediately. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just
not something we're suggesting to people, by the way. Like, this is it's advanced.
I mean,
and we have a lot.
Well, people want to people want to know what are some of the extreme things that we do, and that's why I offered it. But I also wanted to say that, look, there is a safety in place, and clients know if we're utilizing this. Don't even bother asking me. If you test at this level and the number continues to drop 5 minutes later, immediately drink that drink or have that candy.
Not doing all the other things that Andrew would have you do, don't consider doing this yet. Because there's a lot of other foundational things of like following a diet consistently,
100%,
doing cardio consistently, all those things. So guys,
we assume that's all part of
the assumption is that's happening.
Of course,
but people sometimes accuse us of like holding back secrets, or there's we're not giving them the proper cycle, or we're not telling them what people are really taking, or our clients are really taking, or what we're really taking. But this is definitely one of the things that I utilize. It's not with everybody. It's a 1 out of every 25 or 40 clients maybe type thing, but it is something that I've definitely relied on many, many times to get into really great condition very quickly towards the end of a prep. And it's not fun.
And to get there, you would have to be very experienced. Like, you would have to know your body pretty well to know because you're really, what you're trying to do, I mean, at the end of the day, we don't want to be doing cardio with high blood sugar. Let's look at like the opposite, right?
Sure.
So like you take somebody who's just got like blood sugar through the roof, diabetic levels, and it's like, well, doing your cardio, it's not going to be nearly as beneficial as what Andrew's doing.
From a body fat standpoint, no, but it will help to control blood sugar levels.
Of course that will. Of course it will. But I'm talking about
I argue that with
I'm talking the
severely
direct
obese
fat
people
loss.
that have blood sugar issues, I mean,
all right, let's say this.
World.
Let's say this.
They're
They're
not
not
in our world,
direct
so they don't
in that situation though. They're not. My point is, they're not directly burning the same fat as Andrew on the treadmill next to him.
It's not as optimal. Yeah.
So you've spent a lot of time kind of learning how to really carefully manage your blood sugar to get to that point. I'm just pointing out that what you're talking about is great. It's very advanced. And I think it would be something that anybody who wanted to do this would need to learn to work toward, to be able to experiment with and learn their own bodies to the level that you have, versus saying like, hey, this is a great idea. I'm going to get ripped really fast now because I heard this thing on, the internet. I'm going to buy some insulin and try this.
I mean, I just think it's important I'm an open book. I'm not trying to hold secrets back from anybody and this is an informative podcast, but I understand what you're trying to do is steer on the side of safety not advising people that this should be your first.
We're offering both
That's
sides.
What I'm saying. Yeah, I'm trying to say it's what you work toward. It's not where you intro.
This is like a 2-week period at the end of your prep when you've done all the other steps correctly.
Yeah.
And you just have like a little bit of fat on your hamstrings or glutes or something like that like you just want to get it off any way possible. And you're willing to feel very uncomfortable with safeties in place so that you're not going to hurt yourself seriously, but you are walking on a gray line of this is a little more dangerous than a typical fat loss approach. Absolutely.
I like that. Because otherwise I think it can be looked at as like, hey, there's the secret that when we use insulin, this is how you do it out the gate,
But
but
it kind of is if you are going for next level, pull out all the stops, and to get into the condition that the vast majority of people can't get into.
That's not what I'm saying.
I don't know.
Yes, it is. Yeah, me either.
Because I'm not trying to counter. I'm just saying. I guess I am. I'm countering, but only the part that is the people who are looking for, like, oh man, I do everything right, and I feel terrible. I do this. This is next level stuff that can sometimes separate that really good condition from like that's insane conditioning. Like that's the difference right there. That's the polish. That's the last part. And Andrew made a good point. It might only be the last couple weeks, but maybe it's at 8 weeks out and you're just doing a 2-week push. And then you're pulling back and you're going another 3 or 4 weeks. And then you're going another week or two push again. Those things, they're certainly more extreme, but I do like and this isn't like an Andrew Scott thing. So I don't want to make it out.
Yeah. Don't think that I'm against running blood sugar either.
No, not at all. That's what I mean. I don't want to make it sound like
erring on the side of making sure we're not telling people go out and just do this without really understanding what we're trying to talk about here.
Yeah, but at the same time, not holding back. We're being honest. We're being transparent. So we get beat up for everything. It doesn't matter if we we're accused of holding back, and then when we put it out there, oh, these guys are just crazy. They'll reckless. Just do anything to get there. I'm not doing that. Yeah, reckless. That's
well. Let me just say one more thing though about this, because the majority of people will not be able to do this. Okay, because it is extremely uncomfortable. And I'll say this, this is another tangent, but I found people in the last year and a half mentally are just not as strong when it comes to diet and getting. Yeah. But I know people are going to sound like, oh, you like to use the term old heads or back in my day. Yeah, I have seen a major shift, and I think it's because fitness and bodybuilding has become so popular to such a wide range. We're getting people that maybe aren't as mentally tough, because lately I've been getting a lot of pushback when I say increase cardio or, okay, let's do 3 days of zero carbs. Oh, well, like I really don't feel good when I'm on no carbs. No shit. No one feels good when they're on.
And when you get off of that cardio and you got low blood sugar, you're going to be ravenous to the point where sometimes you're going to be like, I don't care. I got to eat. And that's where your discipline and your focus you better be ready for it. Because if you're not psychologically prepared for it, you're going to eat anything you can get your hands on.
That's my point. Because it is extremely uncomfortable. So most people don't like to get to that uncomfortable stage of oh, I feel like my blood sugar is getting a little low if I'm doing cardio after training, right?
Yeah.
You will, if you're doing this, I'm telling you right now, you will be somewhere between feeling halfway drunk, very uncomfortable, sweats throughout your whole body. Your thinking is not all there, right? I mean, that's why I literally like one foot in front of the other. I'm getting leaner. One foot in front of the other. I'm getting like, you literally have to be that way and then have your food ready to eat once you're done. Okay.
Yeah, and if you do go hypo, we've talked about most all this before, but just to say it again, if you do go hypo, you don't need to eat the entire refrigerator to bring your blood sugar back. But people are, your brain literally goes into that panic state. Like it is, it's panic. Like my house is burning down. Yeah, it's like the house is burning down and I have to get out. And you're going to want to consume literally everything under the sun. But no matter what you eat, it's still going to take 10 minutes, to get your blood sugar back.
Here's the kicker, okay? So, because many times when I did this, what I had to look forward to was like 200 grams of chicken, a salad with some cut up tomato and some hot sauce. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just telling, and that honestly, that enough can satiate your physical hunger. But you're still in a groggy state because you're just not getting any carbohydrate. Yeah, you're converting a lot of your protein to sugar eventually with gluconeogenesis, but that's not.
Which takes longer.
Hours. That takes a little while.
A minute. Yeah.
So it's not like once you eat, you're like, oh, I'm good. It's I'm good enough that I can continue this diet and continue this mindset until the next meal, until the next. You know what I mean? So
I'm better than I was 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, like these are some extreme fat loss, scenarios we're talking about here, utilizing insulin, or even if you're just in a prep not utilizing insulin, because you're right, you're ravenous, you when you're that hungry and your blood sugar is that low, your first thought is just stuff it all in my mouth, get it in me. And it's almost like it's going to take 15 minutes before your brain catches up, say, okay, we don't need all that. Right.
It's almost justifying it in a sense. And people have used it. They're like, oh, I had to eat. I ate half of the, package of cookies. Well, number one, why you got a package of cookies in your house anyway? You're prepping. Unless you got kids or a fat wife, you shouldn't have a package of cookies in your house.
A fat wife.
How low are we talking, Peter Edward S., on the blood sugar during cardio?
Yeah, it's everyone's. I know everybody's. I had 48 and didn't know. So
yes, so let's talk about that for a second, because when you do this kind of stuff regularly, or you're in a prep situation like Skip is, I'm not as lean as Skip right now, but like I'm in a situation where I'm pushing it pretty hard. You do get used to just living at 70, with the exception of post meal.
You really do.
So 50 doesn't feel like that much of a drop to you. 45 doesn't feel great. But what I tell people is this, like, test your blood sugar if you think you're really going hypo, and then test it again 5 minutes later. And if that number is continuing to drop, especially fairly rapidly, you should definitely probably eat. If that number stays the same, or even better, starts to go up, you're fine. Stay exactly on your plan. Don't bother your coach. Like, you're in a good spot.
That's an excellent point, because people need to understand that when you get that number, it's that number at that moment. If it's trending downward quickly, because I've gone from 106 to 72 in 15, 20 minutes. It can drop very, very quickly. So track it, over-track it. You can't over-track it. I guess it's actually a bad way to you'll just be like, oh, I probably don't need to take it again. But you need, again, patterns, trends. Pay attention to the patterns. Everything has patterns. Training, nutrition, your scale weight over time, all of these things, your strength progression or regression. There's so many things. Pay attention to the patterns.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else we should talk about with this?
What did we leave out?
I mean, it's all right. So if you didn't want to use intra-workout insulin, you wanted to either use it pre or post. Okay. Let's say you're a post-workout insulin guy. I feel like that's kind of fallen to the wayside lately.
Yeah, it's antiquated,
yeah. I mean, I still use it with people, but like, how would you guys, I guess, how would you do it? Would you say, let's say their normal post-workout carbohydrate intake is like 100 grams. Would you do like 1.5 times that, 2 times that, and then a certain amount of insulin? How do you guys look at it?
I'll be honest, and I know you're setting up this scenario. I don't want to use it. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just think it's so less impactful and less optimal. And the reason being is, not only do you get, when you do it pre-workout, here's the thing that I think people need to understand too, is you do it pre-workout, it doesn't just last through the workout. It still
Yeah.
will continue to be. So you're almost getting that post-workout effect.
That's the way I've looked at it too.
Yeah. So that's why there shouldn't be much of a gap. I train
okay, hold on.
Let me give you 2 hours, so I'm going to benefit.
Let me give you a scenario though, because there's a lot of guys that don't handle intra-workout carbohydrates of any type.
Oh, that's a good point.
Literally, point. And those are the scenarios I'm thinking about. They only can handle water. Even sometimes some people, just with their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, they can't handle anything going through their stomach other than a few sips of water. So, and they want to keep their stomach super light before training, so you can't really load them up before. So the opportune time would be maybe either meal 1 using insulin or a post-workout meal.
Yeah,
I would still do it pre. I would still do it pre, but I'd keep the dose really low pre-workout in there, whatever their pre-workout meal is, so that it's just going to be like an additional little ergogenic aid, not to the point where it's going to like bring their blood sugar down, but that they're going to get benefit from it, getting the glycogen into the muscle before they train.
Okay, I'm going to take your example and I'm going to say you have to do it post-workout. That's what I'm saying. And I'm just going to give numbers. I would hit, just to make my point, I would hit, if I hit 100 grams post-workout and I dosed the insulin prior, I would try to wait until my blood sugar levels were starting to fall if they weren't already, real low, which they probably should be. And then in another hour to 2 hours, I might double the carbs, because that peak is going, especially if you're using something like a Humalog that's going to peak in, 2 hours or 3 hours. Mm-hmm. That second meal is going to be arguably as important, if not more important than the first one. From there, I don't know. That's just kind of, I'm not in love with it, but I see your point that there is an exception.
Let me make an even more clear cut. Okay, because we've got a lot of listeners that have to train first thing in the morning, like really early, to where they can't even eat a meal 1. So maybe they do like a light intra workout. But even when someone does intra workout carbohydrates and that's their first nutrition, really, I'm very hesitant to add insulin at that point, just because. It just doesn't seem like an opportune time. So like that might be an opportunity where I would use, unless they're a veteran and maybe there's a lot of different avenues to go there. But what I'm just trying to figure out, what would you, if they're like, you guys have determined with your client, we can only use insulin post workout for the number of reasons we've talked about. Yeah. Is there would you double the carbs and add insulin? Would you do 1.5? Is there somewhere in between? Like, what would be your mindset with, if for some reason they're like, I can't do intra, maybe they're like, I can't eat a pre-workout meal for some, I don't know, whatever reason.
Yeah. I like the idea of the double. 1.5, okay, but like I say, 100 and then 150 to 200, and then bring it back down to your regular. But again, based on blood sugar levels, how they're responding, because even if they, they can still need to track their blood sugar levels. So see how coming back to the patterns. I'd be in that ballpark, in that area. It would be something similar to that.
Yeah,
I'd go with that if I had to. I'd go with that. If Skip was like, this is what we're going to do, I'd be like, all right, Skip, I'm doing it. Sounds good.
I think we're all in agreement that would probably be the least opportune way to use insulin in a somewhat peri-workout situation. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of, because there's some people that might fall into that class where they have to only use it then. And, would I double my carbs? Would I still just use my normal carbs and add insulin to it? Like what? So people don't think like, if you're only eating 50 grams of carbs post-workout and then you add in, 5 or 8 units of insulin, like you might be in for a rude awakening, an hour and a half later when your blood sugar does drop a little faster than you think it should. So just trying to cover, I guess, all the options or all the avenues we could go with it.
And it's funny because had we had this conversation 15 years ago, that would have been the main option. Would have been like, meal 1 100%. And then pre-workout, or post-workout. Those would be the 2 times.
Yep. Can I throw this question to you guys to kind of wrap it up? I'm curious and I'll gladly give my opinion too, my experience, but what is your, I don't want to say biggest, but what's the most common big dose that you will use for yourself for a load meal and pre-workout? Not like just the highest you've ever used, but one that is the highest, but it's relatively common.
it wouldn't be weird for me to use 15 units of insulin like intra workout, but also do like 150 grams of intra carbs, right? Now that's got to be, you got to be in a really good place digestion wise to handle that sheer amount of fluid volume going through, because you also, depending on carbohydrate source, you got to have a good amount of volume to get that in there, right?
Yeah,
but
a good amount of fluid, yeah.
But for like a loading day, like if I was like, let's use that example of like my base carbs would be 300 grams a day and I'm going to double it to 600 and do about 100 grams of carbs per meal. You know, it wouldn't be weird to do somewhere between 5 and 10 units, probably 10 earlier on. And then as I get tighter and tighter and more sensitive to the effects of insulin, that number's coming down. But in the same token, my insulin number is going down. But in the same coin, my carbohydrate load's probably getting bigger. So my insulin dose is probably staying the same, because you know we're going to need more carbs to continue to elicit the same refeed effect that we're looking for. So,
what about you, Scott?
I would say no more than 10 is where I've been. But anymore though, you saw my my test levels earlier today, right? You can
true.
imagine I'm not doing an awful lot of anything at the moment.
Right.
Yo, I got a female.
I'm going to be the freak. I'm going to be the freak
right
here,
now.
I bet. I bet. You should see my estrogen levels. I probably match her. I might be beating her.
I'm pre-workout. I'm not too high. I rarely go over 10, but that's because I'm not typically in off-season mode where I'm pushing for size and really pushing. I'll push calories in a prep when I can, but it's usually around 10, and more times than not, it's 8. So it's 8 to 10. But I'm going to just blow you guys out of the water with the loading one. I thought you guys would be higher than that because I don't split mine evenly over all meals. So as an example,
say that again. Say that again.
I don't split my carbs evenly over all 6.
Okay.
I usually have 6 or 7 meals. So I'm going to use this last load day as an example. I jumped to 600 carbs, and I'm taking in about. This isn't going to be a good example because it wasn't my highest. I got to go back. I got to go back to when I am absurdly lean in May and really getting down there and starting to get depleted. There were times where those meals, 3 of those 6 meals would be very large carbs. I mean, we're talking, 200-300. That it was nothing for me to push 40 and 50 units of insulin.
Yeah.
At that time, I wasn't using the Lantus. I was only using but that is what it was taking to bring those blood sugar levels back down that quickly to manage that amount of carbohydrate. Yeah. And the reason I was doing that is instead of splitting it up evenly over each meal was because I found that I needed to get the numbers in, the carbs in that I wanted to get in on that day. I couldn't do it every meal because they would start to overlap. I was running out of time. So I would go every other. So the meals in between would be like a protein drink with a smaller amount of carbs. So it may be like 200 at one. These are arbitrary numbers to make my point. 200 at one and maybe 60, in between with a protein drink, and then come back to the 250, whatever it was. Because at that point, I may have been as high as, I'd have to look, but 800 or 900 or 1,000 grams of carbs. So, hitting 40 units, and I'm sure I was higher than that at some point, but it was common for me to hit 40, sometimes 50, and consistently for 3 or 4 of those doses.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, here's what I would do is, when's your next load day? Is it this weekend? Or?
It should be on Sunday. It'll depend on how things progress this week, but it's more than likely.
What day does this episode come out? Is it Friday. Or is it next? Oh, I was going to say it'd be cool if Skip could make a chart, meal, carb count, insulin taken, and then we could put it up on the screen as we're talking. But
I actually have them from. I literally write them down. I don't put them in my phone because it's faster for me to jot them down in a little blood glucose log that came with my Lancet. So I do have that if you want that. It's gibberish. But, it may not be able to, like someone looking at it might not be able to read it exactly for what, I'm saying, but it'll say pokey or it'll say drink. And then it'll have the time and it'll have the amount of carbs and it'll have the insulin dosing. So,
hey, if you want to shoot it over, we'll drop it in post-production.
Okay.
All right. So I guess this was the insulin special. I'd say this is about as deep diving as you could go.
Yeah, I mean, I would say
somebody
if
will
anyone
point
has-
out something that we forgot.
Yeah, I'm sure people will have comments and questions, which maybe, we can touch up on a follow-up episode. Maybe there's something we did forget, or people had specific situations. Because like anything with PEDs and food, it applies to the client or the person who's doing it. All of our insulin sensitivities might be a little bit different. We might react to different insulins a little differently. We might react to the carbohydrate sources a little bit differently, based off our body fat levels, just our individual genetics, what we're doing, the volume of our training. All these different variables come into effect. So it's like, that's why when we're working with people, like we really listen to what they're doing, or we really observe what they're doing, so that we can come up with the very best plan for them. It's not just like a cookie cutter, 100 grams of carbs, 10 units of insulin, here you go with it. We might start with something that sounds cookie cutter, and then listen to that feedback, see that feedback, and then adjust to it. That I mean, like we always say, coaching is reacting to what's going on, and insulin is definitely one of those things that we react to.
Yeah. No, Nags, I'm not transitioning. I was going to tell you guys, I was trying to work on getting a higher test prescription. So I pulled back for a little while, and then I wanted to get some low readings. So
you know what I do with people when they're trying to do that? Like they want to go to their doctor, or they're trying to get a TRT script or whatever.
Yeah.
We'll pull the testosterone. We'll add in almost any other anabolic, but usually something that's going to shut them down faster.
Yeah.
And then I'll have them do black licorice, like high doses of black licorice. And
what does black licorice do?
Lowers your testosterone.
Oh, okay.
Your endogenous testosterone.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about anything with lowering it, because I haven't made any for a decade.
What about smoking pot? Smoking pot will do that too, right?
Yeah.
I don't know to what degree.
Does it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a stat that I remember from like 30 years ago. Smoking one joint lowers your testosterone up to like, I don't know, 32%, something like that.
I don't believe that. Wow. I don't believe that.
And it doesn't return to normal for 22 weeks. Now,
was that
could have been
like
during the Reagan administration.
Yeah, it was during the Reagan, yeah.
This is your brain. This is your brain. Yeah, that worked out really well there, Nancy.
Well, listen, we appreciate you guys tuning in. And we've got a bunch of other stuff. We've got all our other questions and all that. So next episode, we'll definitely get to all that stuff. Go to bodyberry.com. You can reach out to Andrew there, and you can go to teamskip.com to reach out to Skip. You can hit me up at McNallyDiets@gmail.com. And thank you to TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK over there, supplementsource.ca for Canadians. And thank you to everybody from Patreon.
And if I was too verbose during the podcast, I apologize. Verbose just basically means using more words than are necessary to explain what you're trying to convey. So if I was verbose, I apologize.
Skip's word of the day.